Davin de Kergommeaux joins me now in studio. Thanks so much for being here.
My absolute pleasure, Travis.
You brought the book, but you also brought some whiskey, which we're going to get to in just a little bit. And I don't know how I'm going to be standing after the segment, but I appreciate you bringing this in.
My pleasure.
Listen, I want to start by asking you where your love of whiskey begins.
Well, I think it began honestly. You know, I wasn't a big drunk in university or anything like that, but I used to drink a bottle of scotch every year and a case of whiskey. And one day my doctor told me, you know, a little bit of alcohol is good for you. So I just started drinking from there. I didn't like wine so much, so I went to scotch, and the next thing I know, I discovered Canadian whiskey, and that's kind of been it.
That's been it. And you became an expert through the years. And tell me, you know, what it is about Canadian whiskey that you were attracted to.
Well, initially it was the price.
Okay.
You know, an equivalent bottle of Canadian whiskey costs about 20% of what the same quality of scotch would cost. You know, the prices were going up for everything, and I tried this, and I found if you don't buy the cheapest stuff, spend $5 or $10 more, you get really good stuff. So and then nobody was drinking Canadian whiskey. It just was fun.
Yeah, why was nobody drinking Canadian whiskey?
Well, I think that we were not doing a very good job of promoting our whiskey. We were letting Canadian whiskey get a bad rap, and the Scottish were just doing a brilliant job. And everyone thought single malt scotch was the best. It is good, but Canadian whiskey is just as good.
So tell me a little bit about what you learned from this process, traveling the country, tasting different Canadian whiskeys, because there's quite a range from coast to coast.
It's amazing, the range from coast to coast. And each whiskey, I say like whiskey is a product of the human intellect, because the people who are making this whiskey, they're characters, and their character gets into the whiskey. It's just amazing. And yes, from coast to coast, everywhere you go, somebody is really doing something very fascinating with whiskey.
I understand, you know, your favorite parts of this book are about the history of Canadian whiskey. Tell me about the massive industry that we've had in this country.
Well, yeah, Canada was kind of built on whiskey because the distillers were the largest taxpayer in what was to become Canada in the pre-Confederation days. There was no other enterprise paying the kind of taxes they were. They financed their country. But we had so many distilleries that are lost now. We had the Royal Distillery in Hamilton, which disappeared. Yeah. Nobody even knows how it got started, but in this book I tell you how. Yeah. It started as a vinegar factory, and that's why they could get into whiskey just like that, because they already had all the apparatus.
So when did you decide to put this, pen to paper, put this into a book? And why did you decide to do that?
Well, I was making all kinds of notes about Canadian whiskey. Yeah. Back in 2008, 2009, my daughter said, you know, Dad, you're writing a book. So I did, and a miracle of miracles, somebody wanted to publish it. And then now we've had three. This is the third edition, each one being quite different than the others. And I've done a distilleries book as well, and contributed to, I think, 9 other books by other authors. So it just took off.
What does it take to make an excellent whiskey?
Balance. Okay. Balance. When you taste it, it should taste like itself. It shouldn't taste like rye. It shouldn't taste like some kind of wine or something like that. It should taste like balance is the most important thing. A good whiskey should be complex. It should have different stages. With Canadian whiskey, it should start kind of sweet, like butterscotch. It should have a peppery spice in the middle and finish on something almost bitter, like the pith of a grapefruit.
So you talk about the notes, and it sounds like you're talking about wine, but there are notes within whiskey. Tell me about some of, how broad that range is.
Well, I think that it's every bit as broad as wine.
You do?
You have all the floral notes, you have fruity notes, you have nutty notes, you have mineral tones, you have herbalness. It's a huge range, and like 10,000 different flavors, all hung on those 3 pillars that I talked about.
What was the strangest note that you've ever tasted in a whiskey?
The strangest note, it tasted like lemon, lemon pledge.
Lemon, okay.
I'm not going to tell you which whiskey that was because it's not one I would recommend, but it was odd. And I understand that other people have found that same note, and they said it was a problem with the bottles having been cleaned with some kind of a cleaner at the plant that added that note. But it was bizarre, and it wasn't balanced. Travis, it was not balanced.
It was not balanced. So the Lemon Pledge whiskey, if you taste Lemon Pledge, maybe not the best whiskey, maybe not so balanced. You know, there are so many countries around the world that produce whiskey. What sets Canada apart?
Well, in Canada, we make whiskey a different way than most other countries. And this was a process that was started in Canada by Seagrams. Sam Bronfman told his people he wanted that every whiskey to taste the same, like within a range to taste the same. He said, when you buy Coke, that you want it to taste like the next one. So what they did is they decided if they blended a whole bunch of different components together, they could make it the same because the grain changes in flavor every year.
Right.
So what they do is they distill the corn separately, the rye separately, they distill the wheat separately, they mature them in barrels that actually emphasizes the notes from that particular grain, and then they blend them together as mature whiskeys. And this is something that other countries don't do. We make components and turn them into whiskey.
For the people that might be interested in getting into whiskey and whiskey tasting, that don't totally, not sure where to start, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to start by tasting whiskey, not by buying bottles. Maybe go to a bar. Maybe they have a friend. Maybe there's a whiskey event. Go and try a few and see. And don't think that you have to like everything, because you won't. And just try the different range and take your time. Don't rush into it. It takes a while to get the taste for good whiskey, but it's really worth the effort.
All right, now we're going to get to what you've brought here. We'll see, how I do. But tell me about the three different whiskeys that we have here and what we're going to be tasting today.
Rifle Rye is made at Alberta Distillers by a woman by the name of Maria Palafox, who I think has the best palate in Canada. She's an incredible blender. She just, and I watched her, and she just makes the most minute adjustments until she gets it perfect. She knows balance. Give it a little sip.
Oh, that is nice.
That is gorgeous. Yeah.
It's very nice.
Yeah, I think she's like the blender of the century. Honestly, she's brilliant.
Next one.
This is from 40 Creek. This is a new whiskey they just released in the fall. It's called Cherry Wood, like from a cherry tree reserve. They made the whiskey a really well-balanced whiskey, and then they used cherry staves inserted into the barrel to pull some flavor out of the cherry wood. This is a common practice in wine in Spain. And they've been doing it for hundreds of years there. And what that does is that just kind of solidifies the oaky backbone, the wooden backbone of the whiskey. And if you taste this, it's whiskey, it's every bit whiskey, but it just has a little more structure to it. We'll do this again.
Yeah. And the last one that we have here.
The last one that we have is, this is 40 Creek Maple Cask. And this is a whiskey that they made a whiskey, and they put it in a barrel that had been used to mature maple syrup. And what they do is they put the maple syrup into a whiskey cask, pull whiskey out of that. And you'd think this would be sweet, but again, this is only pulled woody notes into the whiskey. There's a little bit of sweetness there that comes from the oak.
Oh, you can smell the maple a little bit. Oh, I like that one. Yeah. Well, they're all good.
That's a fabulous whiskey.
What is your, this is the last question, about this book, also about kind of the mission that you're on to educate people and get awareness out there about Canadian whiskey. What do you hope people take away from this book and the work that you're doing?
Well, I really hope that people will see what a great adventure the story, the history of Canadian whiskey is. I hope that students will start studying the history of Canadian whiskey. There's like 5 theses in that book, and that's just the ones I know off the top of my head. Honestly, there's so much more to know about the history of Canadian whiskey, and we need real good academic researchers to figure it out. And believe me, it'll really be rewarding for them to do it.
Davin, appreciate you being here. Cheers.
Oh, Travis, what a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you very much.
One more?
Cheers.
All right.